There you go. Good morning. This is the second half of the morning session of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. Today is Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. We are turning now to Bill S115, an act relating to miscellaneous agricultural subjects. The bill is currently in Senate Finance. The committee has been asked by the chair of finance to review sections 8 and 9 of the bill that relate to municipal septic storm system, septic storm sewer systems, utilities. And so we took a little testimony, and we're going to take some additional testimony. The task asked of us by the other committee is to either make a recommendation back to them or perhaps propose an amendment to speak to them in one of those two ways, or to them in our powers. For that, though, we had a quick visit on some of these subjects and wanted to revisit and get a little more information today. I'm figuring that we'll actually act on this tomorrow, but try to do most of our homework today and be ready for tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Sawyer. Thank you for joining us. And just for every witness that's here, we're looking for somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 minutes testimony, some Q&A, and then we'll keep on going. So I know you're up to speed. If you could fill us in, introduce yourself for the record, and fill us in on your connection to the issue, and then let us know what you want us to think about.
Thank you. My name is Chip Sawyer. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the City of St. Albans. I'd like to thank Senator Bray and the members of the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony on this issue. Our community is subject to an MS4 permit with requirements for stormwater flow reduction, phosphorus, pollution reduction, and other activities related to water quality. Our city funds these activities via a stormwater utility as enabled by state statute in our charter. And I join many other municipalities and other parties in urging that sections 8 and 9 of S115 be removed. I feel these amendments are not necessary to prevent municipalities from charging stormwater permit fees to agricultural and silvicultural uses. As state law now stands in Title 24, any municipality may adopt bylaws to implement stormwater management and control consistent with the program developed by the Secretary of Natural Resources pursuant to Title 10, Section 1264. And Section 1264, Title 10 says that agricultural and silvicultural uses are exempt from stormwater permits. Thus, municipalities cannot require stormwater permits of these entities, and we can't charge stormwater fees to them, permit fees to them. Well, here, the issue is that stormwater utility fees and stormwater permit fees are different revenue mechanisms levied for different purposes. And I'm here to talk about stormwater utility fees. An MS4 permit enables and sometimes requires that a municipality regulates stormwater on private property in certain situations. But more often than not, a stormwater utility is raising revenues for the other MS4 requirements that don't have to do with regulating private property. These requirements include maintenance of municipal stormwater systems and capital projects to treat stormwater on a community-wide basis. I'd like to reference written and oral testimony previously delivered by Christine Doherty, David Wheeler, Dylan Zwicky, and myself, and I hope I'm not leaving anyone out. I think that with all the chatter you've heard from MS4 communities and others, that you would get some agreement on 3 key points. One is that the exemptions in Title 10, 1264 apply to stormwater permit fees for the regulation of stormwater on a property, not to the stormwater utility fees that fund a community's activities to maintain community stormwater systems and manage community-wide stormwater requirements. Furthermore, the changes proposed to Title 24, 4414 in sections 8 and 9 of S115 could actually have unintended consequences beyond stormwater regulations, the way it's currently written. The second point is that farms that are subjected to required agricultural practices are similarly situated with all other properties in a community concerning stormwater utility fees. Properties that pay a fee towards stormwater regulation on site, whether it be via RAPS or a stormwater permit via ANR authority, still have to pay a stormwater utility fee. So they may be paying to be subject to RAPS. They may be paying to be subject to a stormwater operating fee because they require one. But they all still have to pay the utility fee because the utility fee is funding different activities. And they all can get a utility fee credit for water quality treatment on site. Most stormwater utilities allow you to come in and say, hey, we're doing some water quality treatment on our site. It's worth this much in water quality gains. Can we get a credit on our utility fee? Farms can do that just as well as any other property. And farms receive the same benefits from stormwater utilities that all other properties do. The water quality requirements of an MS4 permit are community-wide, and they are a liability shared by all properties in a municipality. If a community is penalized for not meeting its MS4 requirements, then whatever effects are felt by property owners because of the repercussions of not meeting those requirements will also be felt by farms because they are property owners. So the third point is that stormwater utility fees are shared by all properties. Farms, municipally owned land. Our municipality actually pays a stormwater fee into our utility. Nonprofits, homes, VTrans, everyone is all in. And eroding that all-in approach with an exemption would be detrimental to community water quality efforts. The one caveat to that, as has been mentioned before, is that VTrans was successfully able to get entered into state statute that they are subject to an across-the-board 35% credit whenever they pay a stormwater utility fee. But they still pay a portion of a fee at least. They're not exempt across the board. So I appreciate this opportunity. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, that was helpful. Any committee questions? Senator Watson.
Thank you. So thank you for that. So I just want to make sure that I am understanding correctly. So, because because in my mind, like a stormwater utility is to help pay for municipal stormwater infrastructure, and so do. I mean, my image of farms generally is that, you know, they're along rivers or they're not necessarily connected to a municipal sewer system, and so if they are not necessarily benefiting from municipal infrastructure, then does it make sense for them to be paying into it?
Yeah, a good example would be, you know, our MS4 in the city of St. Albans is connected to the impaired status of a couple streams in our community, and as well as phosphorus in St. Albans Bay and Lake Champlain. Now, those streams are impaired because of all stormwater runoff that is getting to them, whether it be through our underground stormwater system or whether it be over overland stormwater runoff that gets to them from properties that might not have water going to one of our catch basins. So the maintenance of that stormwater system is one of the things we're supposed to do under our MS4 permit, and the utility pays for that. But dealing with the impairment of these streams is another thing our MS4 permit has to do, requires us to deal with. And our utility pays for that as well. So because of the range of things that we need to address under our MS4 permits, our stormwater utilities pay for many different activities, including those that aren't associated with our underground stormwater system. And so if a farm, for instance, can say, yeah, our water doesn't run into your catch basin, it does run into the stream, but before it runs into the stream, it is treated by these RAPs on site. Well, that's when the farm, just like any other property, can say, so can I get a credit on my utility fee because I can prove that water quality is happening on site?
And Senator Watson.
Thank you. So so St. Albans is using the stormwater utility charge to help pay for the MS4 permit
Right.
requirements, meeting the MS4. Okay, that's interesting. And yeah, it feels like there's just some money flow issues that like could be worked out somehow. But okay,
Right.
thank you. That's helpful.
Mr. Sawyer, can you clarify again? So for me, it's sort of easier to imagine, for me at least, you know, the separate storm sewer system impacts and requirements when you're looking at a city street and storm drains and collecting water, moving it around underground pipes in town. But you were talking about how your obligations also extend to streams and stream management. And at least my exposure to farms, generally, I've observed that runoff ends up going to streams. So maybe it's not a storm sewer connection so much as a stream connection. And I'm a little fuzzy on what your obligations are around streams. And I think my real world experience is that farms are very much connected to streams, but not storm sewers. So can you talk about that, please?
Every MS4 that has to deal with impaired streams, you need to acknowledge, normally ANR has determined why those streams are impaired. So in many cases, it's because of the sediments and erosion that hit the streams during a storm event. Just too much water during a thunderstorm, for instance. And what we're subject to are flow restoration goals. Like we need to reduce by a certain percentage the amount of flow that's going to hit a stream during a storm event by a certain percentage. And that's from all of our discharges and outfalls from our storm system, but that's also from overland flow. And we need to take a holistic approach to how we deal with that. So we you know, the streams are impaired by all the water in the community. As soon as a drop of water hits someone's property, it could become a problem. And sometimes the best way to just ratchet down the flow is by focusing on certain areas or certain outfalls in the community that are going to the stream. But the fact of the matter is that all of the runoff during a storm from everyone's land is part of the problem for why that stream is impaired in the first place. So that's why an MS4 in the end is about more than just managing our underground stormwater system and the catch basins and the outfalls. It's about, we have a liability associated with all of the stormwater across the community, no matter how it gets to the waterways.
Sure. Okay. If there's one thing we're aware of, sometimes painfully aware of here, all waters are connected. So you never get to talk about them as discrete. All right, great. That's very helpful. Any other thing that you didn't get to that you'd like to share? Oh.
No, I feel like I've already given you a lot. Yeah, I'd like a lot of the prior testimony before me as well. I've tried to boil a lot of it down into some of those common points that I think you'd get agreement from all of the MS4 communities, or any you're going to find over time that communities that are not MS4s find that they also need to form a stormwater utility, because there are water quality goals that are not always contained within MS4s that some other communities would have to deal with. So I think it's really important that we get stormwater utilities and their stance in state statute right with this. This bill is a great opportunity to talk about this. And the amendment that was proposed to turn this into a study and to remove 8 and 9 and turn it into a study with MS4 stakeholder representation, I think we would be in favor of that. I think we should have that conversation.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. You know, I think some of it is as simple as hearing the term that it's municipal separate storm sewer systems that creates an image of, you know, big pipes running under city streets, as opposed to the connection to the community as a whole and all the waters that the community receives and needs to manage successfully. Okay. Oh, great. Any other community questions for Mr. Sawyer? Senator McCormick.
And I'm not sure if this is for the witness or for the committee. Usually when I don't understand something, I try to just shut up and figure I'll pick up on it somewhere down the line. And that's what I've been doing with this. And we're down the line and I haven't really picked up on it. I need a review. What is the present situation? What does the bill change and why?
So 115, I'll do my best, and Commissioner Beeling is here, so he's far more expert. We can get counsel back too, for its deep expertise. But the short of it for me, and anyone else, please weigh in if you think I'm mischaracterizing, is that S115 in sections 8 and 9 basically proposes to exempt farms from paying a stormwater utility fee. And we're, and the what finance has asked us, because that's definitely a policy decision around that affects water quality. Finance is kicking it back to us as a kind of jurisdiction on water quality and policy.
They do pay a fee now.
Yes, they're paying a fee now, and 115 would say they no longer have to pay that fee. So we're taking testimony to figure that one out.
Do farms deal with stormwater runoff in other ways because they're farms? Are they regulated by the feds in that regard? Or
I think
They
this
regulate
is way
by
back in like CAFO related federal, actually, Commissioner Beeling probably can fill us in that chapter and verse there. But they have the required agricultural practices, and one of the major goals of the RAPs is managing water better on farms. So,
is that one of the arguments for exempting them?
yes, because they have an obligation to manage water on their property, that they should, they're already doing that work. They should be, I don't really want to try to make their case because okay, so now I'm going to shift to an editorial perspective, I suppose. The water doesn't stay entirely in the farm. And that's the nexus. If all water stayed on the farm, then I'd say the RAPs might be managing it, would address managing all the water in the farm. But because we're just talking about how water flows, and it's very hard to ever talk about just someone's discrete water, there's a connection to the rest of the community. And once it's off the farm and in the community, then you're connected to that community obligation that is managed through the MS4 utility. And Mr. Sawyer's listening and has this obligation itself. So if I've left something out there, I'm trying to explain this, feel free to say something. And we also have other witnesses we're going to hear from today. So,
Okay,
Mr.
thanks.
Patch, you're on deck.
Yeah.
All right. So that's how I try to describe the issue, I hope fairly and accurately. All right, with that, let's go to Commissioner Beeling. Thank you for coming back. Good to see you. Who knew you were going to be here so soon again?
A joy. For the record, John Beeling, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. One thing I just wanted to bring to this committee's attention is we received an email from the EPA yesterday afternoon. As you may be aware, the MS4 program is part of our delegated responsibility to enforce the Clean Water Act. These are actually Clean Water Act federal requirements. And so EPA, excuse me, has the ability to take a look at what we're doing here. And they basically warned us that this bill, these sections, could potentially put MS4 permit holders out of compliance with their permit upon its passage. So that's very concerning to us, obviously. We don't have the details. We're starting a dialogue with them. We'll try to figure out what the problem is from their perspective, but that is concerning to us. We principally view this, I think someone mentioned, as an economic issue, but if it's more substantive, that is of concern to us.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask Ted that?
Please.
So wait, can you just take one step back?
Sure.
So you are in favor of removing the exemption because you've heard from the EPA offices that raises other concerns. Am I hearing you correctly?
We are neutral on this bill. This is a sister agency bill, so we're remaining neutral. I'm just saying that from my perspective, I need to be able to make sure we keep our Clean Water Act delegation, and anything puts that at risk is of concern to me.
And this does raise some concern.
Yes, I think until we talk with them and really get a firmer understanding of where they're coming from, I don't want to speculate, but they clearly have seen something. I don't think it's any secret that we are under, the Conservation Law Foundation has filed a delegation petition, which is pending before the EPA, has been pending since April. So anything that plays into that, it has to be a concern to us. We don't want to lose that delegation.
Yep. And can you explain for the committee and anyone listening, the relationship between EPA and ANR and the.
Sure.
So the delegation.
Yeah, so the Clean Water Act, as everyone knows, is a federal statute. A number of states, Vermont among them, have accepted delegation of the responsibility to enforce the Clean Water Act. And just, so there's many programs that we run at DEC and ANR and across the state that enforce the Clean Water. The MS4 is just one of those. So I think, Senator Bray, you stated it pretty accurately that, you know, there is water that leaves farms that is not subject to regulation under the RAPs or under the LFO permits. That's the water that these utilities have to manage. It doesn't matter that it's exempt from regulation. It's there. It doesn't disappear just because it's not permitted. So it's up to them to manage it. And my understanding is they're trying to spread those costs as they do with everything. But again, we're neutral on that. That's a policy call that's appropriate for the legislature to make. So we're not going to get into that kind of thing. My concern is really if this in any way puts our delegation at risk, then I am concerned. But I can't sit here today and say, oh, this is terrible. It's just we need to figure that out. Kind of.
Sure. And before going to Senator Watson, just a quick question. So one of the things we've heard is that because a farm is subject to RAPs, they already have a, I don't know what to call it, they're regulated or burdened in some way by that regulation. And I'm just trying to understand, are there any other properties that aren't farms that are, you know, regulated or burdened by permits or fees that are they live, you know, kind of a fairness question, like, oh,
Right.
are other properties regulated in other ways? For instance, if I don't know your world in detail, but you issue permits for stormwater handling to non-farm properties, right? ANR does.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any other class of entities that are exempt from stormwater permitting that have you know, that have these other requirements imposed upon them. Again, that to me, I think is more of an economic issue.
Yeah.
I don't see that as a regulatory issue. I need to make sure that these MS4 permits are enforceable and that they're working.
Right.
So, you know, if there's some fairness component to it, it could get into this. I think Mr. Sawyer had mentioned this 35% credit to the AOT gets.
Yeah.
You know, that's really not. That's not our business. We
Right,
stay out.
right. That's how the money is raised, handled, et cetera, not how the system operates.
Right.
Okay, great. Senator Watson.
Thank you. Well, so one of the things that I think came up in testimony yesterday was the possibility of asking, you know, players to go work this out, you know, have conversations separate from this space and come back to us. And anyway, and it also kind of came up with Mr. Sawyer's testimony as well, you know, with the idea of a study. And so I don't know if those two things are mutually exclusive, but one, I mean, does that sound like, what do you think about that as a solution, either to have a study or to have some conversation
I think
separately?
I would defer to Mr. Patch on that.
Okay.
This is their bill, so
Yeah.
I don't really feel comfortable commenting on
Okay.
you know, the pending legislation. One thing I want to make clear, you had mentioned that, you know, they have these requirements imposed upon them. There are many sites that have operational and construction permits that also pay into a utility. That's not uncommon. So that's an example. Just
Right.
in the real world, people both have stormwater permits and pay utilities. So they got to manage it on site, but they've also got to help out the community. Just so folks are clear, there are 14 MS4 permits in the state of Vermont. This doesn't affect every farm in Vermont. It's only in those communities where there is an MS4 permit. Okay, so there's 14 in 12 cities. I think there's a few in Burlington, so
Right, like the airport is in MS.
airport has one, UVM has one, yeah.
Okay,
Well, and I even think
Sarah
about like the overlap between MS4 communities and those with stormwater utilities. And Montpelier being an example, in that we're an MS4 community, but knows, at least as of yet, no stormwater utility. So it almost could be even fewer. That are.
Right, you don't have to do it this way. There's a variety of ways to do it. It's a way, and again, we leave it up to the permittees to decide how they want to pay for it. We just need to make sure they're doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, you're a former mayor, so I'm just trying to make sure I'm hearing this right. So you're saying a community can have MS4 obligations, but it could say, for instance, it's going to pay out its fund it through its general operating budget, or it might say, well, our way of funding it is going to be fee-based. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, so in all honesty, I don't recall how Montpelier paid for its MS4 permit requirements, but I suspect it also probably came through the water and sewer funds, which would not have been taxpayer based, would have been rate payer.
Yeah.
But that's my guess. I would have to go back and double check that. So.
Okay, all right. Anything else, Mr. Beal?
But that's really all for me. I'm communicating with my true expert. Again, I'm just the commissioner. I have people who work for me who know much more about this than I do. I don't believe Montpelier is actually an MS4 community. So,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Are you sure?
I didn't know that. Well, this guy knows.
Okay. Well, you said, oh, really? I
If you want
didn't
more
believe that.
testimony, I'm gonna bring him. But,
Okay, maybe
Okay.
I'm wrong.
Okay.
All right.
So
maybe
can
I'm-
you, again, sorry, I didn't quite catch all that. Can you say it again?
So Montpelier is not an MS4 community.
Oh, it's
And
not.
there's one other clarification. There, communities that are non-MS4 can also charge utilities fees just for general stormwater management. But the ones that we're talking about today
Yeah.
are the MS4.
Okay, and in particular, is this because MS4s are an EPA-driven construct?
It's a federal permit.
Yeah.
It's a federal permit enforced by the state, pretty much. I mean, we issue them, but
Right.
we have to comply with the Code of Federal Regulations, which is the basis for the concern that EPA has raised. They've looked at this and say you may not be able to comply with the requirements in the CFR if you do this. And again, I don't know the details.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks. You're helping me slowly put two and two together. I hadn't ever realized that MS4 permits were a federal permit. Okay, that's very helpful. All right.
Thank you.
Any questions for the commissioner? Okay, great. Thanks again. For that, I'd like to go to Mr. Carpenter.
But you have something else.
Remember something?
I'll be very brief for the committee. So I think this is my first time testifying.
Good morning.
Good morning. So for the record, Jared Carpenter representing Lake Champlain Committee. Just a little bit of background on me and clean water issues. Lake Champlain Committee and I helped move in 2015 the Act 64, the Vermont Clean Water Act, which of course spent a fair amount of time in this committee with a few of these members, and
A
then
couple months, maybe.
yes. I counted it. It went through a total of 11 committees. I think I sat in on almost all of them. Then since that time, of course, there have been the required agricultural practices, the 3-acre stormwater rule, the half-acre stormwater rule, the municipal roads general permit, a couple of others that, LCC has been either involved in, helped make comments on, or helped complain about, either, depending on which one it was all the way through. So as a matter of S115, I don't see it as affecting, let's say this, we see it as more of a utility fee issue, but the EPA concerns are certainly going to be concerns of ours. I think more so than anything else that has come up in discussion. This is new. The Lake Champlain Committee was one of the signatories to the dedelegation petition that CLF led on. So we've been very involved all the way through in whether or not the state is living up to its clean water responsibilities generally. I mean, the DDEL petition that was filed was mostly about enforcement of ag water quality and the relationship or lack thereof between ANR and AFM when it comes to not only enforcing standards, but also the inspections and things of that nature, whether it's a point discharge, non-point, it's sort of things of that nature. How this issue may or may not weigh into that is certainly of a concern and something that we will inquire with the department about as well going forward. But as a matter of this, I see it as it seems to be fair that everybody should pay utility fees, that everybody should be all in this sense. The committee down the hall has a very big red button that says exemption on it that it lets to push a lot. So we see this as more of a fee issue. I don't see one way or the other this affecting the stormwater rules, the RAPs, or any of those types of regulations. I mean, we can certainly have discussions as to whether or not agriculture should be exempted from the stormwater permitting or the 3-acre rule. And we can certainly have discussions as to whether or not the RAPs are adequate to handle non-point discharge off of farms, especially in light of recent weather events, the heavy precipitation, 2 inches of rain in an hour after manure has been spread. Are the RAPs, the buffers, the practices, the education process adequate to prevent the manure, the fertilizer, and everything else from winding up in the stream and winding up in the river? Those are important discussions, but those are discussions that are sort of outside of this. I see this as being more of a regards to the utility fee. The study sounds like a good idea, but in light of what the EPA is hinting at, striking the whole section might be a better idea. So there's no exemption. That's a real concern that maybe it's not as much of a concern as it is, but having learned of it 15 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, it certainly raises flags.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carver. Senator McDowell.
Oh, okay. I have something tangential to this, and I wanted to.
If
It
it's
has to
not,
do with stormwater and municipalities.
Tiles, and we can stop tiles too. It's
okay.
No, it doesn't have the word tiles in it.
Does it have the phrase CSO in it?
It's just, I have some very flat agricultural land in my neighborhood. And it's, flat like pool table flat. And it's ditched. And to deal with water, to get water off the land. And it's divided up into 10 and 25 acre parcels just where the ditches are. And in the last few years, stormwater and spring melt have delivered, those ditches have delivered more water than the culverts and bridges on the class 3 town road can handle.
Mhm.
And as a result, the water level gets high and it flows over the road. In a couple roads in the adjoining municipality, which is very close by, and has overwhelmed the bridge and removed it. That's a class 4 road. But now the town is considering throwing the road up, rendering it to no longer be a road, where this water flow is overwhelming the culverts and it's just another result of change in climate and the common agricultural practice of ditching fields to keep equipment from getting bogged down in it. And when the committee discusses this issue, this is tangential, but both and integral. It's right. How can you be both to the discussion?
The heavy rain events are becoming issues, not only with discharge and runoff, but obviously culvert replacement. There's a lot of federal money in ARPA and IIJA for making culverts, expanding culverts, but you go from a small culvert to a big culvert, but if it's still a hanging culvert or if it's not done right, you've wasted the money and the time on just doing that. So
Well, one of the solutions that's being considered is to close the road to make it no longer a public road to maintain, and which would leave the various property owners in 2 towns unable to get to the responsibility of maintaining the class 3 highway.
reminds me of exit 2.5 after Irene off of 89, Randolph, they couldn't get through to exit 2, so they carved one through the farm field and became exit 2.5.
Hillbilly Highway.
Yeah,
Hillbilly Highway.
When someone set up a farm stand for vegetables on the, yeah, or else.
Good old Raleigh.
All right, so I'm gonna sort of file this in the so noted category. I mean, it sounds like your issue is a discrete issue, but I wanted to kind of rope us back to 115. Any other questions for Mr. Carpenter? Or anything you didn't get to that you'd like?
no, that's it for me. And you all know I'm in the building on a very regular basis, so any questions that come up, please flag me down.
Okay,
Great, thank you so much.
great. Mr. Pack, would you like to speak again? Well, I see you in the audience. You want to join us at the table?
Yes, Chairman, if that's
Okay.
all right.
Yeah, I'm
A few more
gonna
minutes.
try to keep us brief because we're gonna have to
Right.
have some committee discussion.
Understood. For the record, Brian Patch with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
Sure. Can I ask a couple of questions I've been collecting as we've been taking this story so far? So in terms of assisting farms in meeting RAPs, are there federal monies available to support implementing RAPs?
Yes,
Thank you. Are there state monies available to implement RAPs?
yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. All right. So please go ahead.
Absolutely. The agency submitted written testimony yesterday, which summarizes the main points that we've been reiterating. But to try to answer the question of what this is all about, S115 is a soft approach to fix something that the agency believes is happening contrary to existing law. The authorities for municipal regulations of the RAPs under their bylaws are excluded from doing that under existing law. And 10 VSA section 1264, under which the MS4 permit authority, under which general operational stormwater permitting happens, farms are exempt. And so what is happening is municipalities, right? If we remember in Act 64 2015, clean water service providers, we talked about the different categories of responsibility and production. And when we look to the phosphorus TMDL for the Lake Champlain Basin TMDL for phosphorus, right? Developed lands, waste load allocation, that's where stormwater, the MS4 permits are operating. And then the agricultural production area waste load allocation, two separate sectors, right? The Agency of Agriculture is charged in statute to regulate farms to not have a discharge, both in the production area and from their fields. And so what we have here is municipalities in urban areas to comply with the town's stormwater requirements, charging farms to pay for stormwater infrastructure they are not contributing to and they cannot benefit from. And so what S115 attempts to do is change some of that language to clarify, well, maybe there's been some ambiguity in the past, but here, let's make it really clear. Farms can't pay for condominium homeowners stormwater cleanouts, right? The municipalities are responsible for managing their MS4 community. The farmers are responsible for their stormwater. So provide that clarification and then add indemnity, right? If those fees have been collected contrary to existing state law, there's an indemnity clause in section 9, which is a diplomatic approach to try to make sure that any fees that were collected erroneously are, farmers won't seek to have that reimbursed. And so it's an attempt to fix what has, in the agency's perspective, been very clear since Act 64 2015 about what is actually permitted under different stormwater permits. MS4 communities do not regulate agriculture. They do not regulate stormwater. Farmers have their own responsibilities. They have their own standards. They're inspected, and the Agency of Agriculture is out there ensuring that there are not discharges of agricultural waste to stormwater networks in these towns. And to think about pervious versus impervious surface, if you look within these communities, the cropland that farmers are managing are contributing significant ecosystem service benefit compared to then if that land was in developed lands and will have condominiums or something on. So there is net benefit to these communities from having farms. And just to remind the committee of conversations about how are we going to fund, right? One of the last parts of the TMDL was how are we going to pay for this, right? A permanent clean water funding source. And there were discussions about what are the operating fees going to be? And the legislature elected to, continue and increase the medium and large farm permits, but did not move forward with fees for the certified small farms or the small farms, because that was found to be a significant burden on the very tight finances of farms. And as we see the viability crisis that's happening, municipalities are in effect imposing that fee, and often on these small farms, $1,600, $1,800 a year, far more than was ever imagined in discussions about how to fundraise or raise funds for the ag water quality cleanup that needs to happen. So farmers are doing over 95% of the phosphorus cleanup for Lake Champlain based on DEC, Agency of Administration reporting. They are making big strides, and we see this as a clarification and an overextension of municipal authority as it comes to meeting their obligations under the MS4 and TMDL requirements.
So can we're not talking about phosphorus reduction, right? We're just talking about flow management and water and volume.
My understanding is,
I haven't heard anyone else saying that the MS4 is managing farm phosphorus.
the MS4, and you have the commissioner here who can hopefully answer questions. I'm looking at the section 1.2 of the MS4 general permit and the authority for issuing this to the towns that are required to meet those standards, and it includes the 10 VSA section 1264 as the authority, which would exclude farms from being regulated under those MS4s. And so an MS4, whatever they're managing for, whether it's stormwater flow, phosphorus as a proxy, sediment as a proxy, it doesn't matter. Farms aren't regulated or governed by those MS4 permits. And so raising funds on their back is not fair.
All right. Well, so I guess we'll have to go to council to sort this one out a little bit, but you're equating paying an MS4 fee with regulation.
Yes.
And some people have just said that's a financial, it's not regulation of the activity on the farm, it's requiring a payment to pay for the system that is, the farm is embedded in a community and they're being obligated to contribute to that. So I don't know that there's, you and I or this committee can sort out the legal standard on that. Are you asserting you can?
I cannot, but I can offer 2 points if that's all right. Farmers' domiciles and dwelling is not a farm structure. That would be subject to the stormwater utility. Absolutely no question there, right? They are members of the community. That's not farming. Their driveway, their house, they're going to have that one ISU, whatever the term is in the town. They're charged for that. The second point you heard from your Mr. O'Grady on Tuesday, that he would consider fee regulation, because if farmers don't pay that fee, the town can seek legal recourse and can take the land. And so it is a regulation to assess a fee for stormwater, based on what I heard. So I do think it is related, and I think that it's very clear, right? We have the all-in phrase that, part of state government during the rollout of Act 64 2015, we're all in, meant every sector has to do their fair share, right? Farmers contribute 41% of the phosphorus of the Lake Champlain based on the EPA modeling. They are doing 56% of the cleanup. They are doing more than their fair share. The wastewater treatment facilities are actually given an allocation for future growth and increase their phosphorus loading over the life of TMDL. And in some ways, farmers are doing more of the cleanup to allow for growth in these developed areas under the TMDL.
My understanding from our work on the water quality, worked on the sort of outside contribution of farms to phosphorus reduction, was because we as a state have said, what's the most cost-effective way to reduce? And so since we're funding that work, we're looking for the most cost-effective, our fiduciary responsibility. Let's spend the money wisely. In farms, you get the greatest bang for the buck in reducing phosphorus. Let's support the work on farms. And so I just want to be fair to both sides, and outside contribution sounds like going above and beyond. If it's work supported through funding, then it seems as though we're all just being wise about spending money where it's the most effective. Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I'm not necessarily going to wade in on this point. I think what was really compelling to me was the concern that EPA had raised. And I'm just wondering if you have a response to that, because it makes me think, as someone who I actually don't believe I have an MS4 community in our district. My thought is that the larger question that would implicate my constituents is whether or not we lost any kind of standing. So what is do you feel that we have time to slow this down to make sure that we're getting our ducks in a row on this? What is your response to kind of that concern? And I know that there's some, you don't want to go against another agency, or the neutrality piece is important, but that's my concern and why I am supportive of us removing the exemption at this point.
So the Agency of Agriculture's analysis is that the exemption exists for 2 reasons. And this bill is an attempt to notify municipalities that are charging farms while providing them indemnity from farmers recovering the fees that have been assessed already. This is the first I've heard that EPA has any concerns about sections 8 and 9. So we're going to have to evaluate what language narrowly crafted to ensure farms are not charged a stormwater utility user fee for utility they cannot participate or benefit in, and for which the credit of their paying into that system is credited towards the developed lands. That's what we're seeking, is farmers to, they have a big enough challenge to make it to 2038 and make the reductions they have to make. They don't need to be further financially burdened to offset the responsibilities of another sector.
So I guess my question was more, because I understand your point on this, I do, and I think it's a fair one when we talk about how we're supporting farms, but I still think the risk, we don't know, and that risk is concerning to me, and I'm wondering why now, immediately, we need to do this, and if it would not, from my read, be in our best interest to actually take a breather on this and try to understand what the concerns are from EPA before we were to put something forward and then potentially risk that situation. So I'm wondering
if the committee, you're the policymakers, farmers are in grave financial distress right now. And if language is put in place to ensure there is a pause in the collection of those fees at the same time, I think that would be reasonable, as the agency's general counsel has argued that the existing statutory construction precludes municipalities from regulating farms in this way. And we don't, the law doesn't, that's the law as it stands. And so striking the bill and having a study isn't going to change this conflict that potentially exists. So, the law as proposed in section in S115, section 8.9 is intended to be surgical and just changing that to just, essentially remind that, fees can't be charged to farms for this purpose.
So can I ask one?
Sure.
So is it the position of the Agency of Agriculture that we shouldn't wait to kind of understand the concerns of EPA, but instead move forward with this?
Seeing as it's crossover week, and this is the first, I don't, so it's Thursday, definitely consult with DEC and try to understand exactly what EPA is pointing towards. We don't want to jeopardize the state's delegation, but we think this is a state financing issue and will not in any way affect the MS4 permits, the authority that the municipalities have to regulate that, or the agencies of agriculture's requirement to implement the non-point source pollution control program. So the intent is not to do that.
Thank you, that was really
Sure.
helpful.
Well, intent is great to hear, and and it seems like we're going to need legal analysis from experts outside this committee to figure out what that exposure is about delegation and delegation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
So committee, for just 2 minutes of wrap up on this. Is the committee interested? I talked to Mr. O'Grady yesterday to begin drafting in case we wanted to have something in hand, a amendment to bring that would create, it would leave current practice in place, but it would create a study group to assess the basically to work out the implications of what's being debated back and forth. And now we have another tier to it, which I'd say is particularly compelling, and that is with the delegation of A&R, the EPA has consequences far beyond just the narrow issue we're discussing. So is the committee interested in looking at draft language? It's basically creating a study group, status quo on the current law, and create a study group.
That makes
Yes,
sense.
yes.
Okay, so I'll go back to Mr. Grady. He started it, and I'll tune something up, circulate it to the committee, and then we'll look at it tomorrow and vote.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.